The Assembly Committee on Government Affairs will come to order. Mr. Secretary, please call roll.
Assemblywoman Anderson.
Present.
Assemblywoman Black.
Here.
Assemblywoman Brown May.
Here.
Assemblywoman Considine.
Present.
Assemblywoman Dickman.
Here.
Assemblywoman Duran.
Here.
Assemblyman Ellison.
Present.
Assemblywoman Martinez.
Present.
Assemblyman Matthews.
Here.
Assemblyman MacArthur.
Here.
Assemblywoman Thomas.
Here.
Assemblywoman Torres.
Here.
Chair Flores.
Present. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Please let the record reflect that all members are present. We have a quorum. Good morning, members. Thank you all, as always, for being here this morning. And I know we're going to engage in some thoughtful dialogue today and hopefully be able to do something good for Nevada, as we try to do every single morning. For those of you watching us virtually, thank you for joining us this morning. We want to remind you that we'll be doing public comment at the end of today's meeting. And today on the agenda, we have one bill. It's Assembly Bill 186. Before we open up that hearing, I want to remind members to please keep your microphones on mute unless you are speaking, and that you please keep your cameras on at all times. Unless you have an emergency, please just give me a heads up and turn it off to handle whatever matter you got to resolve. With that, this morning we have Assembly Bill 186, and we're going to welcome back Assemblywoman Gwynn, who's now making it a habit to make this her home. It's her second home. Assemblywoman, whenever you're ready, we'll open up the hearing on Assembly Bill 186.
Thank you, Chair Flores and members of the committee. For the record, I am Rochelle Wynn. I represent Assembly District 10 in Southern Nevada and Central Las Vegas. And I am here to present Assembly Bill 186 for your consideration. And it is a pleasure to be back. It is my second favorite morning committee. And I do seem to be spending a lot of time here, so perhaps I can get some honorary membership in government affairs this session. Assembly Bill 186. What's the problem? Ticket and arrest quotas are perverse policy policing activity that at many times be used to fund peace departments and also evaluate the effectiveness of peace officers. Their use damages the integrity of law enforcement and communities throughout Nevada. Quotas set a predetermined number of transactions that peace officers are required to issue in a given time frame. This practice has been criticized as a revenue-generating measure that encourages unjust policing, pressures officers to unfairly target individuals, particularly near the end of a given quota period. Whether in fact quotas exist or are in practice, I think we are all familiar with the concept that I'm talking about. I'm sure that many of you have been driving around your communities and you see a disproportionate number of police officers pulling over drivers, and you think, hey, it must be the end of the month and they're trying to get their quota of tickets. So I think we're all familiar with that policy. And while I've been told that in many communities and many of our law enforcement agencies don't practice this, I think we're all familiar with the concept, and we see some of these like implicit practices also occurring still today. By considering the quantity of tickets and officer performance evaluations, such as quotas can encourage more aggressive rather than more effective policing. When a peace officer is pressured or incentivized to issue a certain number of tickets or arrests, the interactions with citizens become less about peacekeeping and more about forced confrontations. Further, the domino effect of officers making arrests based on quotas can have a negative effect across the justice system, including overworked investigators, crowded jails, and overburdened courts. However, by far, the worst effect of quotas is on the individuals who otherwise would not get caught up in the justice system. The long-term ripple effect on people's livelihoods, families, finances, and future job prospects can be devastating, particularly for people who are barely getting by as is. Assembly Bill 186 seeks to prohibit law enforcement agencies from requiring a peace officer to issue a certain number of traffic citations or make a certain number of arrests. In addition, under this bill, a peace officer's evaluation, salary, or eligibility for promotion must not consider the number of tickets or arrests issued. If we can improve the environment in which our peace officers interact with our citizens, the effect may be less claims of unnecessary targeting and use of force. There are other more effective ways to evaluate the performance of peace officers, and most of our law enforcement agencies are actually doing this. Peace officers should be incentivized for productivity by considering the other types of data and focusing more on technique, demeanor, and meaningful outcomes. If we can do away with quotas, an officer's direct supervisor will have more subjectivity when evaluating the effectiveness of their employees' work. Finally, I would like to point out that many states have implemented anti-quota legislation, including Iowa, Minnesota, Missouri, Montana, Nebraska, Pennsylvania, and Illinois, just to name a few. Mr. Chair, that concludes my brief opening remarks. And at this time, I would now like to provide Eddie Ablesser and Troy Scrumey the opportunity to provide some additional testimony in support of Assembly Bill 186. And also, they would be here to answer any questions about the bill and the conceptual amendment that I apologize came late. And I also see that there's some typos in it. So, but I think the intent is very clear in the language in Section 1. We removed, after consulting with all of the stakeholders, the suggest language. And with that, and the chair's permission, I would like to turn this over to Eddie Ablesser.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. Good morning, Eddie. Hope you're doing well. Welcome to your Committee on Government Affairs, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Chairman Flores. Appreciate the time this morning. Honorable members of the committee and Chairman Flores, for the record, my name is Eddie Ablesser with Tri-Strategies, EDDIE-ABLESER. We're proud to represent the Nevada Police Union. This is the first statewide Category 1 peace officer union that encompasses the brave women and men from state parks, university police, game wardens, and the Department of Public Safety. I want to extend a special thank you to Assemblywoman Nguyen for her leadership and sponsorship of this very important issue. This past year has been a whirlwind for our peace officers, from the national attention to the many tragic deaths across this country to the attempting of law enforcement to enforce COVID policies in many different communities, and then the siege on our nation's capital. Our brave women and men who wear the badge have gone from being praised to demonized to then canonized, all in a period of 10 months. Our goal at the Nevada Police Union is to support reasonable, common sense policies that drive directly at the primary goal of law enforcement, and that is to keep all in our community safe. It is with that intent that the Nevada Police Union has brought the problem of quotas in citations and arrests, commonly known as policing for profit. I want to be very clear that the practice of demanding a specific quantity of citations and arrests from management to line level staff does not adhere to the mission of keeping everyone in our community safe. While evaluating officers based on the number of citations and arrests was a way of managing in the 1970s, this methodology's time has come and gone. What this method does is hurt the most vulnerable and underprivileged citizens in our community. Moreover, underprivileged and communities of color are disproportionately affected by these practices. And an example is that the men and women from low-income communities that oftentimes cannot afford basic vehicle repairs, such as a broken taillight or headlight, not to mention expired registration. When there's a quota on file or in practice by police management, police officers will stop and ticket drivers for very minor traffic offenses and violations, or for exceeding the speed limit by only a few miles per hour. These are violations and speeds that would not normally be bothered with by our peace officers. Moreover, when officers are pressured to reach a certain target of custodial arrests, they oftentimes are forced with tough decisions of arresting someone and reaching the quota, or simply providing a citation for items or issues like trespassing, petty larceny, or panhandling, which at most times the appropriate course of action might be a simple citation. But if they do that, they might be placed on a 90-day performance review period for not reaching their arrest quota. In some circumstances, officers are being pushed to average around 100 citations per month, along with the many other tasks that they engage in. Management generally does not put quotas into writing, although verbally they will tell officers to push for higher numbers, often writing a ticket where they're often writing tickets near the end of their month that they might not normally write. If officers do not meet these quotas, then they may also face possible financial punishment by getting a do not meet standards on their work performance standards, resulting in loss of promotion, raises, and step increases, along with the loss of a positive work culture at that agency. In my role working with the Nevada Police Union, I have heard many accounts of what this archaic method does to our officers. I want to share a couple of examples. One trooper who led their shift in crashes investigated, DUI arrests, and calls for services was brought to the command staff, and instead of being praised for the good work that they were doing, they were reprimanded by management for having the least amount of citations on the squad. That trooper left that disciplinary meeting and gave a citation to the first person they caught speeding. Happened to be a senior citizen woman who was on the way to the hospital attending a family medical emergency. That officer regrets that decision and that experience, but was following management orders. Another story of a tongue lashing that happened to an officer by management because they were issuing too many warnings. They were told that warnings do not look good on performance reviews, and instead to start doing more citations. Another example is the officer who was actually honored and praised by MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Drivers, for the great work in the substantial DUI arrests in protecting the roadways from inebriated drivers. This officer was given so much grief about not writing enough tickets and focusing too much on DUIs that eventually the officer increased their numbers of citations, did not focus on the DUIs as much, and management never complained to that officer again. Honorable members of the Government Affairs Committee, the language of this bill is simple but effective. NRS 289 will be amended to prohibit any law enforcement agency from ordering, mandating, or requiring that any peace officer must issue a certain number of citations or arrests. Furthermore, these agencies are prohibited from considering the number of citations and arrests in the peace officer's performance review and should not factor into promotions or salary assignments. A quota might be good for manufacturing factories. They simply have no place in modern day policing. Thank you for your time this morning in consideration of this bill. I'm available for any questions that you might have. I know my colleague from Metro, Troy Scroom, is on, who wants to provide some testimony from his side as well.
With your permission, Chair, if we could go to Troy Scroom, that would be great.
Absolutely. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning, Chair Flores and members of the committee. Please excuse me, I have my notes off to my side here, so I keep track. I jotted some things down last night. For the record, my name is Troyce, Troyce, last name Krumme, Krumme. I am a sergeant with the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, and I currently serve as the vice chairman for the Las Vegas Police Managers and Supervisors Association. At the PMSA, we are also proud members of the Public Safety Alliance of Nevada, and we represent over 10,000 officers across the state of Nevada, stretching from Reno all the way down to Las Vegas, and I'm here speaking on their behalf as well. We would like to thank Assemblywoman Nguyen and the sponsors of this bill for taking up this legislation. In our opinion, far too long, the policing profession has relied on statistics in the form of how many tickets officers are writing and how many arrests they are making. The belief is that an officer producing high numbers in these stats is a productive police officer, and vice versa, one that is not producing in these areas is not productive. If policing were a Fortune 500 company, this belief would be accurate, but policing is not a Fortune 500 company dependent on profits to exist. Policing should exist to accomplish one mission: provide safety to the community. What the over-reliance on stats has produced, what the over-reliance on stats has produced is pressures from executive management down to the line officers to produce in areas of increasing vehicle and person stops, writing citations, and making arrests. While all these actions are legal in the eyes of the Nevada Revised Statute, those may have otherwise not have been made due to officer discretion absent pressures from above. Stops such as these result in unnecessary police-citizen contacts. When Assemblywoman Nguyen approached our group regarding this bill, we were enthused that a reform topic such as this was being taken. Our only concern with the initial language was that we felt it limited the supervisor's ability to hold the rare officer that simply doesn't work when he comes to work accountable. The community should expect, as well as police leaders expect, police officers to show up to work and do their best to keep the community safe. So the accountability piece on work performance was important to us at the supervisor level. The amended language that Assemblywoman Nguyen has offered accomplishes that mission. In a Fortune 500 company, the leaders are accountable to its shareholders. In policing, we should be held accountable to the communities we serve. The community should have a say on how they are policed, and the communities in Nevada have spoken. They want police to keep them safe while at the same time eliminating unneeded contacts. Public trust should be the metric by which police effectiveness is measured. We believe this bill outlawing quotas, both implied and overt, will accomplish this mission. It is time for police executives to strategize based on positive progress rather than bean counting. And I am also here for any questions. Thank you.
And thank you to all three of you this morning for joining us and walking us through the objective of this bill. Excuse me, we have quite a few questions, so we'll go ahead and start off with Assemblywoman Thomas.
Good morning, Chair, and thank you, Assemblywoman Nguyen, for the presentation, and I do appreciate the bill. As a citizen of Las Vegas, Nevada, and Assembly District 17 in beautiful North Las Vegas, you know, at the end of the month, we do see a high number of our police officers at checkpoints and a lot of pullovers. But my question has to do with the bill is good, but what's the effectiveness of the bill? How do I know that this bill will ensure that all police departments across the board will adhere to what this bill stands for? Because right now, I don't see, you know, how we can maybe, you know, with disobedience to the bill, you know, this practice will continue. What's the meat of the issue of ensuring that this bill will be effective? Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblywoman Thomas. Rochelle Nguyen for the record. Chair, may I go directly to the member asking the question?
Please do.
Thank you. Assemblywoman Thomas, that is one of the questions that I had when I was first approached with the bill idea to ban quotas. My first thought was, oh my gosh, do we still have quotas? Is that something that still exists in statute? Is that still something that exists in different departments? And I learned that there are certain agencies that still do have them to a certain extent. And then it got to a larger question of like, how do you take care of this like cultural like shift and this cultural change? And I know that like most agencies, I don't think, including Metro and other agencies will come in and say, we don't have quotas, we're against quotas. But they obviously, you can see some of the pervasive like, you know, philosophy behind quotas still exists there when you see like tons of police officers making arrests at a certain time of the month. You know, you can hear from supervisors and management that it is something that we have just become accustomed to in law enforcement to quantifying that number because it is easy to quantify that number. It is probably more difficult to quantify how many like positive like interactions or you know, engaging in community policing organizations or, you know, helping, you know, victims of like domestic abuse go to like a shelter and get them resources. Those are not things that are easily quantified. They should be quantified if we're going to start putting numbers on things like how many of these more like evidence-based policing practices should be rewarded within that like promotion and evaluation system. So will this like completely eliminate that? Probably not, but I think it is a very good step in the right direction in giving guidance on what our policy is as a state to curb like, you know, these negative, unnecessary policing for profit and interactions with our communities. And I think probably Eddie and Troyce might be able to expand on that as well, because they are obviously in the like field doing this work. So I can turn it over to them if they have any other further remarks.
Assemblywoman Thomas, through Chair Flores, Eddie Avalos for the record. I would contend that the subsection 2 of the bill provides what I believe is a significant structure in prohibiting this practice from being widespread within departments. Unfortunately, we know through work performance standards, there is a quantified value that every employee is based on. I'm going to give you an example of state employees. The Department of Administration has work performance standards for all state employees. They're all judged based off of the same form. And there is a box on that form. When I was a former administrator, I did it as well. And it had to do with quantifiable data. And you evaluated your employee based on this quantifiable data. And so in the Department of Public Safety, state parks, wildlife, university police, in their work performance standards, they have quantifiable data, which is how many tickets, how many arrests did that individual do. We want to pivot away from this legalistic style of policing and move more towards a service style, watchdog style of policing that engages with the public and creates a broader trust. In our experience working with the women and men on the line level, they do not desire to go out and just create unnecessary contact with the public. They want to do the good work, protect the public, help drivers or individuals that are in need on the roadside, rather than trying to meet a certain number in order to keep their job or to get promotion and raises. So I think that subsection 2 carries a lot of weight in preventing that.
Chair Flores, may I?
Please do. Excuse me, please do.
Yes, to Assemblywoman Thomas through Chair Flores. I'm going to offer a hypothetical. I think I understand the question is how do we hold agencies accountable for violating this law? And I'll just be honest, I don't know the law as written will, but I'm going to offer you how it can be effective anyway. So this law is going to be put into 289, which is otherwise known as the Officer Bill of Rights. So I'm going to paint a hypothetical question of how that law can be used to address an agency from an officer perspective. Let's say you have a young lady who comes on the police department. She wants to make a difference in her community. She gets hired on and she wants to help the community. So in her day-to-day business, she goes out, maybe she, goes through Mario's Market on the corner of Lake Mead and MLK and sees a lady taking her groceries out. She helps the lady with the groceries and she has some conversations about the community. She reads to some kids at the local elementary school to try to build on positive community relations. She helps out at the Bolden Little League, which is a little league that got started a few years ago to address the community. And that's how she spends her day. Yes, she answers calls for service. Yes, she solves conflicts. Yes, she makes appropriate arrests when probable cause exists, and it's the right way to quail a certain situation. But that's not the focus of her time. The focus of the time is on the community. And then she spends 3 days of her work week doing that. We come to her 4th day, and because of some pressures from above, because the arrest numbers aren't where the area command would like them to be when they have to report up, she's pulled aside, thanked for all her great work, but told, hey, your arrest numbers are a little low. I need an arrest by this shift. Now, that's not a quota. Metro doesn't have quotas. I'll be the first one to say that. They don't say, you have to make this many, you have to make this many. What they feel is pressure to produce these things. So if a sergeant sees his numbers low and he knows that the lieutenant is possibly going to ask him questions, it's easier just to ask the officer to go out there and do what he knows she can do. Well, what type of attitude is she now going to go into that shift with? and she's going to go down to her local area, and maybe she spots a gentleman jaywalking. She wouldn't have otherwise stopped him, but she needs to produce these numbers, so she goes ahead and effectuates the stop. The gentleman feels like the police are just messing with him, and unfortunately, in this case, he might be accurate, because the only reason she's potentially stopping him is to meet this standard by which, so she doesn't catch grief at the end of the shift. Well, if that call somehow goes bad, the headline is call goes bad or use of force used to stop jaywalking. In fact, that's not what happened. Neither one of the officer or the citizen wanted or needed to be there in this case. With this law in place, what that officer could do is go to her association. She could tell her association, hey, I'm feeling pressured to produce these numbers that in NRS 289 prohibit, and the association acting on her behalf can file a grievance with the agency. Now, is one grievance of this measure going to make a difference? No. But if the processes don't stop at a particular agency and grievances start to pile up, those can then be presented to, say, another legislative session or to independent third parties to say, hey, the problem, the way we tried to solve the problem isn't working. Maybe we need to take it a step further. In my opinion, and I know it sounds bad from the union guy, asking the union to help out with effectiveness on agencies and creating better community relations, I think that's a way that this law can be used to address that. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you. I don't want to butcher your name. Is it Crummy?
It's Crummy, long U.
Crummy. All right, Crummy. Thank you so much for the explanation. And Chair, just to follow up.
Please follow up.
Thank you so much. So if I understand this correctly, Officer Alviser and Krume, I like that. Anyway, you would suggest that the culture in leadership should change, and the only way that you could effectively get them to change is perhaps through your union by using this bill. Either one.
Assemblywoman, through Chair Flores, this is Troy Scrimmer for the record. That's 100% correct, Assemblywoman. In our opinion, to effectively reform policing, you have to reform at the executive level. An anecdote that I use, the Navy guy swabbing the deck isn't even allowed up in the room where the steering wheel exists to turn the ship. There's only one person on the ship allowed to steer the ship in a different direction. And I believe that should be our goal with the community and policing, is to kind of steer the ship into a different culture. And the only way to do that is to affect executive leadership. I think the executives in Nevada, by far, do a really good job. I know the sheriff that I work for does amazing work and supports his officers. However, the over-reliance on stats is a culture thing. It is not a specific police executive thing. It started in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. You could say what you want about the broken windows theories and the chief of police that ushered in CompStat and the idea that stats is what creates productivity. That notwithstanding, that's, I believe, how we got to where we are today, is the over-reliance on stats. And what we need to do is find ways to pressure executives to stop relying on stats and start relying on progress with the community. I've seen it work firsthand, and I know it can work.
Thank you, sir. I do appreciate that answer. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
And thank all three of you for engaging in that conversation. If I could go next to Assemblywoman Brown-May.
Thank you, Chair Flores. Thank you, Assemblywoman Nguyen, for bringing this bill forward. Really looking forward to hearing how the conversation flushes out. My question is relative to anticipated cost savings. If we are going to rely less on arrests and the supporting I think, the supporting processes, right, that support arrests, and instead issue citations. Do we anticipate then potentially a cost savings for some of our departments that we could then reallocate toward more community engagement activities? Has anybody fleshed the numbers out?
Yeah, Rochelle Wynn for the record. Thank you for your question, Assemblywoman Brown May. We haven't looked at it from a financial aspect. Honestly, I don't know if Mr. Ablasser has some additional details. Banning quotas across the country has become something that I think people are trying to make that policy shift. Most evidence-based policing realizes that the number of arrests does not necessarily make your community safer. And so I know that they have all, like law enforcement agencies currently have lots of different avenues to address, policing and crime prevention, as well as enforcement. And they don't always have to end in an arrest. Sometimes they can issue a warning. Sometimes it can be, directing people to other resources in the community and working with, their community policing programs as well as their community partners. So I don't know. Mr. Ablasser, do you have any information about cost savings?
Eddie Ablasser for the record, Chairman Flores and Assemblywoman Brown May. We have not analyzed or done a financial audit of what it would look like. I think there is speculative and I think strong assumptive reasoning that if you pull that thread and you look at the goal and purpose of the exhaustive men and women that are on the streets, they're limited. So if they're paying their attention to citations and not focusing on perhaps other preventative or helping with traffic accidents or certain calls to service in the community, that shift occurs, and so there's less attention paid in these other areas. I think that you can look at all law enforcement agencies and see a reallocation of priority and focus, which would then provide value to the community and might show some cost savings at the end of the day.
Thank you. I appreciate that response. I realize we're not a money committee, and I certainly didn't want to sort of throw a monkey in the wrench here. But I think it's a great thing to just get on the record that as we shift a focus on policing, potentially that could be an area where we would continue to look.
All right, thank you, Assemblywoman. Next, if we could go to Assemblywoman Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Assemblymember Nguyen, for bringing this forward. A quick question that is not necessarily from the language of this bill, but was something in both an answer that you gave as well as an answer that I believe Sergeant, sorry, I've got the right title, Mr. Kumye gave as well. For the evaluations, is that decision made at the state level? Is that made at a county level? How exactly are the evaluations set up, number one? And then number two, is there a way to start adding in that positive community experiences as part of the evaluation process? So I realize that's not germane to the language that's being presented today, but just was something that, based upon some answers that was received, just made me think about some items.
I think probably, Rochelle Wynn for the record, I think probably maybe, I don't know who would be best to answer this. Probably Mr. Ablasser or Mr. Crumay, just because I know that they work in this field and they know how, this would be enacted. Do you either have an answer?
Eddie Ablasser for the record, Mr. Chair and Assemblywoman Anderson, and I know that Sergeant Crumay will have a take on this, especially from our municipal and local level approach. I'll tell you that while it's not germane to this piece of legislation, I would encourage legislators to review the Department of Administration's work performance standardized forms. I think that there's value in differentiating what those look like to the variety of employees throughout the state, and recognizing that not all should be evaluated on one base metric. More importantly, how can we encourage our law enforcement agencies to add other types of metrics into their evaluation process and encourage them to utilize some of the other fundamental philosophies of policing, such as service-based policing or watchdog and engaged policing. And so I think those would be much more valuable to the evaluation of that officer. I know that Sergeant Creme has some anecdotes and in his duty he's had experiences, so I'm sure he can add value to this conversation as well.
Chair, may I?
Please.
To Assemblywoman Anderson through Chair Flores. At least for Metro, we don't list statistics on our evaluation, and you asked about the evaluation period. Our evaluation periods are yearly, unless you're a probationary employee, meaning newly hired coming out of field training or newly promoted. There's a 1-year probationary period, and you are evaluated either quarterly or every 6 months, depending on which position you're in. But at Metro, we don't specifically talk about stats. There are, I don't want to call them generic lines, but I speak plain language. There are generic lines that kind of drives the supervisor on what to evaluate. And it's really up to the supervisor for how they want to pull the employee category in there. If you were asking me, I would love, and I haven't even offered this before, I just thought about it when you were asking the question, I would love a line in the performance evaluation that says, how did you help your community? And then that drives some conversation with the officer to get there. So, you asking that question kind of drove that. But to answer your question, at least from Metro, the stats that we're talking about don't specifically appear on our evaluations.
Thank you so much for that clarification. And I'm sorry I had the wrong title for you, Sergeant Creme. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. Next, if we can go to Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you so much for the presentation, Assemblywoman Nguyen, and for this legislation. I think it's really clear to me that evidence-based policing is about preventing crime. And I think that this legislation reinforces what we know to be evidence-based policing. So I appreciate it. And my question is for Mr. Creme. I'm just wondering if you can give us an example of when Metro implemented a strategy that did not prioritize arrests and citations as a performance measure.
Certainly, and thank you for the question. For the record, Troyes Crumey through Chair to Assemblywoman Torres. In 2015, in Metro's Bolden Area Command, which encompasses all, if not most, or most, if not all, of the historic west side of Las Vegas, the leadership there implemented a program of which they were going to stop focusing on beans. They were going to stop focusing on stats, how many citations, stops, and arrests. And what they were going to focus was on positive community relations. So from the captain to the lieutenant that worked with the captain, the lieutenants and the supervisors were instructed to tell their officers to stop worrying about the stops, stop worrying about the number. What they wanted to do is encourage contact. They wanted the officers to get out of their cars, go talk to people. I don't know if everyone's aware, but I guarantee you the lady sipping her lemonade in the rocking chair on the front porch of the neighborhood knows everything that's going on. If you go up there and you hand her a bottle of water on a hot day, or hand her a cold case homicide flyer and start to build conversation, that show and tends to lead to community trust. The metric that saw this succeed over a 90-day period was that violent crime dropped 61%. So if we're counting beans and we're saying beans are the reason that happened, you would say, well, the arrests must have went up, but arrests dropped dramatically. What did go up was calls for service. That is the community reaching out to the police, trusting in the police to come deal with an issue that they have. That is how you measure public trust, in my opinion, is those increased community contacts. When the community wants the police to come out to solve a specific problem, again, violent crime came down, the number of arrests came down, and the calls for service went up. So that was a 90-day period. Additionally, there was another captain that in 2012 to 2014-ish timeframe ran a similar type strategy. And in an area command that historically had the highest number of homicides in certain years, in a number of years, actually saw 0 homicides take place over a 19-month period. And that is a huge, huge leg up. So it's been shown to work, and it can.
And thank you. Assemblywoman, follow-up?
No, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Kirby, for the response. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Next, if we can go to Assemblyman Ellison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have a problem at all with, going after, nobody should be on a quota on tickets. But one of the things that you said, one of the officers said that they told their people not to do DUI pullovers and arrests, but to issue tickets. I thought the number one thing to the police officer is public safety, not issuing a ticket. So if they're not doing DUIs, arrests, then the public's in danger of being killed or hurt or damage the properties. I got a problem with that. And we shouldn't be limited arrests based on quota. We should be making arrests based on public safety. Do you want to answer that question? Because I hope I misunderstood that.
Rochelle Wynn, for the record, I'll be honest with you, I don't remember anyone saying it. And it obviously is not our intent to stop people from arresting people for committing crimes that endanger our public. I don't think there is a police officer that I know of that I would hope does not exist that would not arrest someone for actively committing a crime such as DUI. So I didn't hear that. And if there was some misunderstanding where that came out and someone said that, I don't think that is an accurate representation of our intent or what this law would cover.
And I thank you for that. But the statement was that one of the officers was doing more DUI pullovers than writing citations. So he got in trouble for not doing more tickets and stopped doing the DUIs. And that's what I thought I understood. And because that's important. I had a sister hit by a drunk driver being a flagman on a highway many, many, many years ago. And she suffered for many years of the tragedy she went through. And so I don't stand for drunk drivers. I think that once they're caught, they should have to follow the letter of the law. And that's, but I don't know if that was who made that statement. I just want to make sure I did not hear that correctly. And I thought it was Mr. Kumi.
I'm sure he can clarify. I can see Mr. Ebelether is like unmuted himself, so maybe he can clarify.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair and Assemblyman Ellison. For the record, Eddie Ableser. I did want to clarify I am not an officer. I work with Tri-Strategies. We are the firm that works and represents Nevada Police Union. I was using an anecdote that I have heard within our team that there was an officer who actually received an award in a prior period from MAD for the work that they did in DUI arrests and really aggressively ensuring that our roadways were safe from intoxicated drivers. And rather than being internally praised by management did criticize this individual because they had no citations or the lowest citations of other
His
officers.
volume went off, Mr. Chair.
Hello?
I could hear him, but Assemblyman Ellison, can you hear me? You may have lost audio from the whole committee. Broadcast, could you please assist Assemblyman Ellison? I don't believe he can hear us. And I think he's, oh, there it is. Assemblyman Ellison, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can now. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
It went dead for a minute under his statement. I'm sorry. I apologize.
Oh, it works. Please continue.
Okay. Eddie Ableser again for the record, and Assemblyman Ellison through Chair Flores. The point I was getting to is we have multiple stories where the use of quotas disincentivizes officers many times from protecting, the safety and peace of the public because they have to reach a certain amount of citations. And oftentimes management, command, in their way, disincentivize those engagements of DUI stops and incentivizes the numeric value of citation. And I gave an anecdote of an officer who was praised and honored by MAD for their great work, and they were unfortunately not praised by management. They were disciplined by management because they didn't have enough citations. I think that was the story that you're getting to. We think it's very unfortunate. We think that type of practice for management should never exist, that our officers who are out there doing the hard, good work of keeping the roadways safe should be praised for their great work, and instead removing these quotas, which is the intent of this bill, and that's why we brought this forward, Assemblyman, that we believe putting these prohibitions in place for law enforcement agencies will take away management's use of that type of demand or order on quotas for citations or arrests, so that our officers can actually get out and do the full breadth of their job in protecting the public.
And Rochelle Wynn, for the record, just to clarify, Assemblyman Ellison, we're using that term like citations. So like in this example, the officer was making DUI arrests, like protecting our community, was praised by community groups such as Mothers Against Drunk Driving, and then internally was being like penalized in performance evaluations because they weren't getting out other types of traffic citations. And so this is what this law intends to protect, if that makes sense.
And thank you, and I appreciate that, and that's what we need to do. We should be doing the people that are breaking the law, not jaywalking. Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblyman. I think you just endorsed the bill there, Assemblyman Ellison. If we could please go to Assemblyman Matthews, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome back, Assemblywoman Wynn. It's good to see you back with this committee again. My question is actually for Sergeant Crumey, and thank you for your remarks, Sergeant. Just wondering if, and you touched on this a little, but I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit more to how the push or the burden of knowing that you have to make an arrest or write a citation, how that would negatively impact interaction between police and the public. Thank you.
Senator Matthews, that is a great question. And for the record, this is Troyce Crumey through Chair Flores to Assemblyman Matthews. I think it's all based in attitude, to tell you the truth. Attitude, for the most part, will dictate how a contact is going to go. If an officer wishes to be doing some other type of community contact and opts that he has to make this stop that he wouldn't otherwise make, he's already got potentially a negative attitude. We would hope that they wouldn't, that they would be able to disguise that, so to speak, but he's got a negative attitude, and being stopped by the police isn't fun. It's just not. The officer can be as nice and as professional as they can, but when the blue lights go on in the back window or the blue lights come on while you're walking down the sidewalk, there's a level of stress that goes up on the individual being stopped. And it's across the board, in my opinion. So you potentially have an officer that isn't excited about making the stop because they wouldn't have otherwise done it. And then you have an individual who doesn't want to be stopped to begin with because nobody wants to be stopped by the police. And you can kind of understand where those two negative influences come together. You have a potential for a bit of a powder cake, so to speak. And again, I apologize. I speak plainly sometimes. Not that all of these contacts blow up, but sometimes they're not nice, whether they're verbally or not. And in our opinion, that's why this bill is important, and that's what drives that. And I just, if I can have a minute to indulge, I do want to. A lot of people on the committee might be wondering, well, if they're not holding them accountable to numbers, how can they hold them accountable? And I can speak as a supervisor. I've been a sergeant for will be 10 years next month. I represent middle management at Metro, the largest police agency in this state. And I can assure anyone who has a question whether a supervisor can hold their people accountable to work productivity in light of this bill passing, I can assure the committee that they can. They'll have to find new strategies, which is, I believe, the point of reform. So I hope that answers your question, Assemblyman.
It does. Thank you. And Mr. Chair, follow up if I may.
Please do.
Thank you. And by the way, I just wanted to, for point of clarity, I think this is a really, really good bill. So I thank all of you for bringing it forward. My second question would be, and obviously I understand, very clearly the value of removing the consideration of numbers of citations and arrests from that review process. I would imagine, though, that there's, of course, value in the data and the statistics on the number of arrests and citations made by particular officers, and getting a good handle on that for the purpose of identifying, possible outliers. And that could go either way. You've got an officer who's making a disproportionately low or significantly higher number of either. I would think that is something worth exploring. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about, absent it being involved in the review process, the performance review process for that officer, what might be done with that information if you discover there is an officer whose numbers are just way out of sync with what you would typically expect. What might be done to address that? Thank you.
Chair Flores, Troy Scrummy for the record, through you to Assemblyman Matthews. Just so I can clarify the question, are you asking what type of accountability piece could happen if the numbers were low?
Well, either way, if you have a particular officer whose numbers of either arrests or citations on either the low end or the high end just really jump out as an outlier, very different from, say, the rest of the force. I'm just wondering if you could walk through a little bit, without it being used in the performance review process, what might be done to at least inquire or look into what might explain that or account for that.
I understand. So it's speaking from Metro and obviously at the municipal level, our performance evaluations are written yearly, and my executive management might not like me saying this, and I don't want to say they're discounted, but the more effectiveness is leading throughout the year, not when we sit down and write it on a piece of paper. So if let's say I had a patrol officer, and let's go to the extreme high end first, and his numbers were out of line with the rest of his squad, working same days off, same areas. I would tell you what I would do is, which I should be doing anyways, but I would pay more attention to read the details of his arrest. Why is he making the arrest? What's going on? Does he think he needs to make these arrests just to produce numbers? Does he have a misinterpretation of how the department and his boss feels about him? And go over the quality of his work rather than the quantity. The reason quality is important, if he stops somebody because through his training and experience, he identifies that what this person is doing in a certain neighborhood doesn't look right. And in policing, we use JDLR. It just doesn't look right. That's kind of raises the hair on the back of our neck. And we articulate some reasonable suspicion to stop them. And we run their background. And let's say they have a series of robbery convictions in their area, and we happen to have a high level of robberies going on in that particular area, and he makes an arrest because the person has a violent crime warrant. I'm not going to get on that officer for effectuating that arrest. If all of his arrests are for minor traffic citations that went to a warrant, while some of those are effective, a warrant signed by a judge is an order by a judge to bring the person to court, but Nevada revised statute gives us discretion for a reason, and I believe that's why. So from an accountability piece, I don't know that I would necessarily put it on a performance review. What I would do is throughout the year sit him down and talk about the importance of having a positive impact on the community and to effectuate quality work and not worry about quantity. I hope that answers your question.
It does. Thank you so much. And thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And thank you. Next, we'll go to Assemblywoman Dickman.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And I just want to agree with Assemblyman Matthews. I think this is a great bill. And I'm not sure who this question might be for, and maybe no one's going to want to take it, but I'm just kind of curious, besides performance evaluations, what other reasons are there for requiring quotas? I mean, do the courts rely pretty heavily on the fines that you generate? I mean, if that's the case, we should be finding a different way to pay for our courts. It's just my opinion, but.
Assemblywoman Rochelle Wynn, for the record. Thank you for your question, Assemblywoman Dickman, and I appreciate your support of Assembly Bill 186. Like our local law enforcement agencies are not funded through traffic tickets.
Right.
They are not receiving that money directly. Some of our courts have some of those provisions that currently can go to, there's like a awkward distribution. I do have an assembly bill to decriminalize traffic, so you will see hopefully some changes in that area on how we are funding our court systems and how we are collecting those fees for that. I think that is a larger policy issue that we probably should address as a state on how we are funding our courts, how we are funding our government. I think that's a bigger picture. This bill, doesn't directly relate to that, but I think it is a change that is necessary. I think it is evidence-based. I think it incorporates better practices, going forward, and I think it will lead to better relationships amongst our law enforcement and our communities.
Thank you so much. And just another question, if I may. Maybe more of a comment. It just seems to me that police officers would be freed up to do so many other things if they weren't forced to do this. So that's one of the reasons I appreciate the bill.
I think it is difficult to change a culture. As you heard from some of the testimony of the people that are in these industries and the anecdotal evidence and their examples in the community about being penalized or being talked to about either high numbers or low numbers, or the fact that we're still talking about numbers. I think that it is very much ingrained in the culture of law enforcement. And I think moving to some of these more evidence-based practices, these deterrent practices that have been shown to show significant decreases in violent crime, to show that increased trust and reliance with law enforcement and community partners. I think that this shows as a state that we want to move in that direction.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. And I think we wanted to come back briefly to Assemblywoman, or better said, Vice Chair Torres.
Thank you, Chair. And just real quickly, Assemblywoman, I really thank you for this piece of legislation. Thank you for working with the stakeholders on it. I think it's an excellent bill, and I'm hoping that with your amendment, you wouldn't mind adding me on as a sponsor. Thank you.
I would be honored to add you on, Vice Chair. And if there are any other members that are on this committee that would like to be amended into the bill, please feel free to reach out. There obviously is a forthcoming amendment with Section 1, taking out that suggest language. So if you do have interest, please let me know, and I would be happy to add you on.
Assemblywoman, I was hoping that you'd be the first one to say no to someone trying to add themselves as a sponsor. I don't know if we've ever had that, but I had my fingers crossed that you would say no to the Vice Chair, and then that she would, in a very disappointed manner, turn off her camera. I wanted to say thank you, members, for all the questions. At this point, I don't believe we have...
Mr. Chairman, she did a wonderful job explaining. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Assemblyman. At this time, I'd like to invite those wishing to speak in support. I'm first going to check to see if we have anybody wishing to speak in support that is joining us virtually. I believe we do have somebody joining us virtually wishing to speak in support. Is that correct, broadcast?
We do. I believe we have Daniel, I'm going to butcher his name, from NPRI on there.
Understood.
Yes, good morning. I'm here, Chair.
Good morning, sir. We have now opened up for those wishing to speak in support of Assembly Bill 186, and we'll have you start it off. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning. For the record, Daniel Honchariw, Honchariw, on behalf of the Nevada Policy Research Institute. NPRI supports AB 186 and thanks its sponsors, and specifically Assemblywoman Nguyen, for bringing it forth. Never should law enforcement be incentivized to find crime. Any policies which encourage law enforcement to do so typically result in dramatic, disparate impacts on marginalized communities. We've seen this pattern before, specifically in regards to Nevada's laws governing civil asset forfeiture. When police are incentivized, financially or otherwise, to locate potential criminal activity, it is lower income minority neighborhoods which suffer most. Additionally, prohibiting the use of quotas is hardly a novel concept, as the Assemblywoman explained. She mentioned a few states which have passed laws to restrict or entirely prohibit the use of such quotas while assessing the quality and or performance of a peace officer. But I'll add to that list the states of New York, California, Texas, Nebraska, and North Carolina. AB 186 seeks to eradicate the potential for such unjust impacts on the marginalized, and thus has NPRI's full support. Thank you very much.
And thank you. I don't believe we have anybody else wishing to join us via video. At this time, we'll go to the phone lines. Broadcast, if we could go to the phone lines and invite those wishing to speak in support of Assembly Bill 186.
To testify in support of Assembly Bill 186, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits of 695. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes, and you may begin.
Good morning, Chair Flores, members of the committee. This is Holly Wellborn, HOLLYWELBORN, Policy Director for the ACLU of Nevada, here in support of AB 186. I want to thank Assemblywoman Thomas for her question. I'd like to just address a few issues first, because I think that question brings up the larger issue about the deep problems associated with Chapter 289 of the Nevada Revised Statutes and the public's ability and law enforcement management's ability to hold individual officers accountable for misconduct. Chapter 289 is full of provisions that suppress evidence of misconduct in internal affairs investigations and in civil cases. It's frustrating for us as civil rights organizations to have to deal with that. However, that issue will require an entirely new piece of legislation and an examination of why we have decided as a legislature and as a state to codify law enforcement collective bargaining agreements. But our hands are not completely tied in holding folks accountable under the provisions that this bill would create. Chapter 289 does present challenges, but it's not the only road to holding law enforcement agencies accountable through the courts. This bill will give us the tools that we need to monitor law enforcement behavior. I am happy to send the committee information from a lawsuit that's developing in Rhode Island under a very similar law with a peace officer bill of rights that's very similar to ours. I'll be sure to share that information with the committee. I don't want to yet again see another exclusion of evidence, but this prohibition in this bill is absolutely necessary as a matter of policy. Quotas lead to illegal arrest, unnecessary encounters with law enforcement, and ruin lives. A quota policy can only generate disrespect for and cynicism about law enforcement. We thank Assemblywoman Nguyen for bringing this bill forward and encourage the committee's support.
Thank you for joining us this morning. If we could go to the next caller wishing to testify in support of Assembly Bill 186.
Caller with the last 3 digits of 710. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good morning, committee. My name is Maria Nieto, spelled M-A-R-I, Nieto, N-I-E-T-O, and I am the state coordinator for Mi Familia Vota. Mi Familia Vota would like to express their support for this bill and would like to thank the presenters for bringing it forward. Police are more likely to write tickets to Black and Brown communities, which continuously puts us and our communities in the criminal justice system. It is important to note the great effect that it can have on our communities. An unpaid ticket equals jail, a driver license suspension, and could also lead to deportation. We would like to extend the support and just don't want to be repetitive to what everyone else has said, but thank you, and thank you so much for bringing this forward.
And thank you. If we could go to the next caller wishing to speak in support of Assembly Bill 186.
Caller with the last three digits of 318. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good morning, Chair Flores and members of the committee. This is Kendra Birchie, KendraBertschy, and I'm with the Washoe County Public Defender's Office. Today, I'm testifying in support on behalf of my office, as well as for John Pirro with the Clark County Public Defender's Office, and Sarah Hawkins, the president of NACJ. We appreciate Assemblywoman Nguyen for bringing this important bill forward, and it's time for Nevada to join the other states across the nation who have already banned traffic ticket quotas. This practice has led to several issues, and it is extremely troubling to hear that it has led not only to disproportional treatment of our citizens, which has led to mistrust, but more importantly, that our officers are focused on traffic tickets rather than public safety. I would just note that the NACJ did a very lengthy teach-in on NRS 289. If any of the committee members have questions about that, I'm happy to provide. I believe there is a recording of that video. Thank you so much for your time today.
And thank you for joining us this morning. If we could go to the next caller wishing to testify in support of Assembly Bill 186.
Caller with the last three digits of 683. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Rick McCann, R-I-C-K, McCann, M-C-C-A-N-N, Nevada Association of Public Safety Officers, and a member of the Nevada Law Enforcement Coalition. I'll make it brief, which is rare for me. We are in support of AB 186 with this amendment. I do want to thank the sponsor, Assemblywoman Nguyen, for the bill and for working with the stakeholders on the amendment that you have before you. Thank you for your time. And again, we do support AB 186. Thanks.
And thank you for joining us this morning. Next caller wishing to testify in support of Assembly Bill 186.
For the new callers to testify in support of Assembly Bill 186, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no more callers in support at this time.
Thank you. At this time, I'd like to invite those wishing to testify in opposition to Assembly Bill 86. If we could go to the phone lines again.
To testify in opposition to Assembly Bill 186, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Call-in user 1, please press *6 to unmute yourself.
Hi, this is Chuck Calloway, Director of Intergovernmental Services for the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. We're in support of the intent of AB 186, which you've heard from the police unions on today. However, the way the bill is written, we have concerns, and I'm here in opposition. I know an amendment was submitted this morning that removes the word suggest, and I think that's a step in the right direction. However, I wanted to put on the record that the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department does not have quotas. We do not receive any direct revenue from citations. Obviously, we are funded through the city and the county, and potentially revenue that comes to them could be used to fund us. But our agency does not receive direct revenue from traffic citations. We are not policing for profit, as was stated in some of the testimony. We do have performance measures, and we do expect officers to be proactive. Officers engage in numerous activities throughout the day: community policing, responding to calls for service, assisting with neighborhood disputes and standby for move-outs and everything you can imagine. But let's not forget that law enforcement is a component of law enforcement is enforcing the law. And, to give a couple of quick scenarios, one of the top complaints we get from citizens in neighborhoods is speeders and traffic issues. Constituents call in daily about this. School zone issues, where people are driving fast, endangering children in school zones, people getting their cars broken into in neighborhoods. And we expect our officers to be proactive and to go out and to address those situations. And if we had a squad where 8 officers were working very hard to reduce crime in their neighborhoods, and we had 1 officer that had not done anything for a month, the taxpayers are paying the salary for this officer, and we expect them to work. And although we don't have a quota, and we're not telling them write an X number of tickets, a supervisor needs to be able to have that conversation with employees that they need to get out and address crime that is occurring. And often that requires citations to be written, and it requires arrests to be made. Officers have discretion where they don't have to make an arrest or write a citation if one is not warranted. We had 18 fatalities so far on our roadways this year. We've seen an uptick from last year in violent crime, and it's important that officers are proactive, and it's important that supervisors can hold them accountable. I have some concerns with the language in Section 2. During the special session, Senate Bill 2 made an effort to repeal some of the language that had passed in, I believe it was Senate Bill 242 on the Police Officers Bill of Rights, that again makes it difficult for supervisors to hold bad apple officers accountable. And that Section 2 is still a little unclear to me how that might impact an investigation against an officer for some type of wrongdoing, if that officer were then to turn around and claim that his supervisors were requiring him to write tickets, and an arbitrator believed that would warrant throwing out evidence in a case, an internal investigation against that officer. So I have concerns. I appreciate Assemblywoman Wynn working with us and holding a recent conversation on this, and look forward to working with everyone moving forward to ensure that we can not have quotas, but that we can hold our employees accountable. Thank you.
And thank you for joining us this morning. If we could go to the next caller wishing to testify in opposition to Assembly Bill 186.
Caller with the last 3 digits of 196. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You'll have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm Eric Spratley, ERICSPRATLEY. I'm the Executive Director of the Nevada Sheriffs and Chiefs Association. I'll start off by saying none of the Nevada Sheriffs and Chiefs Association membership supports having quotas. We absolutely support the intent of the bill and have worked with the bill sponsor and appreciate that opportunity to arrive at language which ratchets down on the types of improper supervisory and officer behaviors we've heard here today. It gives law enforcement agency leadership the ability to properly manage these supervisors and officers. We've not yet arrived at that language. The language in this bill is only considering a potential quota on a minimum number of traffic citations or arrests. Yet we know there are officers who do not use proper discretion when dealing with the public and will, as you heard in testimony here today, issue a citation to a little old lady on the way to a hospital, when that is clearly improper, not in alignment with how Nevada law enforcement agency executives want their officers serving the public. You might have supervisors that encourage their team in a competition for more citations or arrests, or officers who amongst themselves engage in a competition at the expense of the public. If there are supervisors leading teams in this kind of behavior or promoting improper numerical requirements of any kind, that behavior needs to be stopped. Law enforcement leadership needs to have the ability to address heavy-handed officers or supervisors
I believe we lost you. Broadcast, can you confirm that it's everybody who lost him? I know at times my computer is acting up. I'm getting folk nodding their head. I think we all lost him. If we could take a quick 1 minute recess just so we can get him back. 1 minute recess.
Caller with the last three digits of 196. Can you hear me?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. There we go.
All right. The Assembly Committee
Stand
on
by for end
Government
of
Affairs will come back to order. The Assembly Committee on Government Affairs will come back to order. Thank you. Sorry, we lost you there for a second. Please continue.
Okay, just confirm you can hear me now.
Yes, we can. If you would like to start back a few seconds from where we lost you, just to make sure that we all follow along with your points.
Okay, I was just saying that supervisors leading teams and numerical requirements, that kind of behavior needs to be stopped. And law enforcement leadership needs to have the ability to address heavy-handed officers or supervisors who are writing excessive citations for minimal violations or taking every person they can to jail. The language in this bill would not allow us to address officers that are outliers and are too aggressive or supervisors who encourage this behavior, which is not the direction law enforcement executives in Nevada are headed these past several years. Our law enforcement leadership are interested in public service and public safety, not in arrest or citation numbers or generating revenue, also known as policing for profit. We're not interested in that. Being able to correct the poor behavior of an officer or supervisor requires having the ability to review all aspects of their job performance so that it is in line with the public safety mission of the agency executive and the people they serve. This bill does not allow leadership to consider citation or arrest numbers, even if they are excessive, to address them. We've heard the term evidence-based several times here today, and our law enforcement agency leaders across Nevada are fully engaged in evidence-based practices. This bill, in Section 1.2, does not allow all of the evidence of improper behavior to be addressed, considered, and or used in disciplinary actions to correct aggressive behaviors, which we've described previously. So for that reason, we must be opposed.
And thank you for joining us this morning. If we could please go to the next caller wishing to testify in opposition to Assembly Bill 186.
Chair, there are no more callers in opposition at this time.
Thank you. At this time, I'd like to invite those wishing to speak in the neutral position to Assembly Bill 186.
To testify in neutral on Assembly Bill 186, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no callers in neutral at this time.
Thank you. Assemblywoman Nguyen, if we could have you come back and any closing remarks you may have.
Thank you, Chair. Rochelle Wynn for the record. I will just say that I will continue to reach out to the opposition in this. I think it's important that we continue to have this full conversation. When I was initially approached with this topic in the fall of 2020, I reached out to many of these agencies, and I know that there is a lot of support. Although I will say that some of this opposition also shows just how ingrained these quota policies are in our agencies. We heard a lot about evidence-based policing, and I will thank our law enforcement partners that were here testifying in support and in opposition for teaching me a lot about what is effective and what evidence-based policing is about. It is about preventing crime. Deterrence is much more preferable than enforcement. And I think shifting that policy within our state and within our different agencies from the top down, and I think it starts here at the legislature. I always think of it this way. One of the good examples that I was given to kind of explain some of this evidence-based policing and deterrence is New Year's Eve on the Las Vegas Strip is a perfect example of this policy. And it's how we can learn that numbers and using numbers and arrests of numbers don't evaluate effectiveness in keeping us safe. Every New Year's Eve, we have thousands of cops, like 1,000 cops. They're all on duty. Everyone that's known a cop, that's had a cop, that's been a cop, knows that they are working on New Year's Eve. And they are working on the Strip, and it is one of the days where they have very few arrests. And it's because it's effective. It's that high visibility patrol. It's being in the community. And I think we can learn a lot from that example moving forward. This policy is just a step in that right direction. And in closing, I would like to thank everyone for the opportunity to present in government affairs again. It is always my pleasure. And for the people that came to testify, I look forward to continuing to work to move Assembly Bill 186, and I would urge your support for this important piece of legislation.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. And again, it's always a pleasure to host a hearing with you presenting. And thank you to your co-presenters for walking us through real life examples and how this impacts the day-to-day operation and life of a member of law enforcement. And to law enforcement, all of you, as always, we're thankful to all the work you do day in, day out. And we hope that this bill could potentially help with your interactions with the public and building community trust. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and close out the hearing on Assembly Bill 186. And at this time, I'd like to invite those of you wishing to speak in public comment to please call in. As you are calling in, I want to remind you to please refrain from trying to engage in a debate to a bill we've already heard. This is not a time to do that. If you wanted to speak on a bill in the past and you didn't have the opportunity to do so, please just make sure you submit some written remarks and we can always get that on the record. The purpose of public comment is for you to speak about any type of item that falls in the general purview of our committee. And I ask that you please try to limit your remarks to 2 minutes for the sake of efficiency and allowing others to speak. With that, we'll go to public comment. Broadcast, please.
To take your place in the public comment queue, please press star 9 now. Caller with the last 3 digits of 556. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Anne Marie Grant, ANNEMARIEGRANT. My brother Thomas Purdy was 38 years old when he was hogtied by Reno police on October 4th, 2015. And then asphyxiated to death over 40 minutes later while still hogtied by Washoe County Sheriff's Office. My brother was the second of 3 men to be asphyxiated by deputies. The medical examiner in my brother's case said my brother would not have died but for the restraint and physical force used against him by the officers. Nico Lerone Smith was 31 years old when he was asphyxiated at Washoe County Sheriff's Office, 8/29/15. The inmate death rate was 5 times the national average when Nico died a horrible, torturous death at the hands of Sergeant Corey Salperino, Brandon Wood, and Paul Hubble, who also asphyxiated my brother Thomas Purdy to death. Nico was taken into custody at bail bondsman, clearly in the midst of a mental health crisis. Instead of getting him help, deputies, 6 to 8 of them, surrounded Nico, who was face down and prone, and kneeled on his back with full weight and asphyxiated him to death. No deputy attempted CPR. I'd just like to mention that my family wasn't notified that my brother was laying up at Renown Hospital on life support, brain dead by Washoe County Sheriff's Office. My brother was laying at Renown all by himself, brain dead, for 2 days before the hospital was able to reach out and find us. The jail just dumped him there and said, we don't want him. Please promote bills that support and promote accountability and transparency from law enforcement. And please support bills that protect the community members from excessive policing. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. And I know we've had the opportunity to hear from you in the past. It may be of interest to you to maybe potentially have information that you have regarding this matter to our committee manager, and we can share with the members. I know we have an opportunity to hear from you, but it may be of interest to the committee to actually have an opportunity to get documents from you, and maybe it could follow up with you individually but that's up to you. I'm just suggesting it. If we could please go to the next caller waiting to speak in public comment.
Chair, the public line is open and working, but there are no more callers at this time.
Thank you. At this time, I'd like to close out public comment. Thank you, those of you, or better said, you, ma'am, for calling in and joining us this morning. Members, I want to remind you, tomorrow we're going to be hearing Assembly Bill 111. Speaker Frierson will be joining us, and hopefully we can engage in some meaningful dialogue. Please give yourself an opportunity to review that bill ahead of time so that we can prepare and have some good conversations. With that, members, I appreciate everybody's attentiveness and conversation today. This